Welcome to Slash Bash, where today I'm bringing you some of the best pro-revenge stories of 2021. Client tries to screw me by locking me out of my own system. Since so many people assume this happened in the States, I just wanted to say that I'm from a small country in Europe. The laws and regulations here are different than in the United States. We have a government agency here that has everything to do with registering companies, and they do keep track of who's who. If you're a serial startup guy who leaves nothing but burnt ashes behind you, you cannot do it here. You have to register the owner and members of the board of the company if there is one. If you have a prior history of failed companies or you've broken the law in some regard, you are blacklisted at that establishment. This is my first post, so be gentle with me. I've worked as an independent contractor in the IT field for over 20 years, doing all manner of things, from creating simple HTML sites to managing a big hotel's complete IT infrastructure. One of the many clients I had back in the day I was coding biggish custom websites was a rental company. Now, I had heard a lot of warnings about not working with this particular guy that owned it. He had a reputation that he was sharp as a tack, backstabbing, and conniving. He was a lawyer after all. So I went into the partnership with that in mind. He wanted a new website for his renting gig, where people would list their home for rent, renters would sign up and pay a subscription to the site, and he would get the whole lot. Nothing out of the ordinary there. So we make a pretty good deal on paper, we sign it, and I get started on the project. Coding everything in PHP goes well, but he suddenly demands that I show him progress only a week into the project. He wants to see the website front now. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I tried to explain to him that the front end work isn't scheduled to start until after 6 weeks of back-end programming and that I only had pure code to show right now. The contract we signed clearly states this. He then gets on his high horse and demands that I put everything on hold to do the front end first, design, and then program. I, being really young at the time and fairly naive, agreed to do this without asking for it to be added to the contract as an addendum and start working on the design immediately. Now, the contract stated that I was given free reign of the design decisions as long as I maintained the same color scheme and used the same logo on the site. So I make a fast draft in Fireworks. This was back when it was a Macromedia product before the Adobe acquisition, and within 2 days I show him. He's not impressed with my first draft. He demands we go in a different direction and puts together a list of demands for me. I, as always, aim to please the customer, and so I just do what he wants. I design a new layout following his list of demands, but when I present that draft to him, he doesn't like that one either. That is how the next 3 months go. A never-ending cycle where he makes endless demands and is never happy with anything, no matter how closely I follow what he asks for. Now we are close to 4 months into the project, and he demands to see a working showcase of the back end. I point out that he himself changed the order in how the project was being done. He had demanded that I do the front-end design first instead of the back-end as stated in the contract. He now turns on me and says, "Yes, but the contract we both signed says you will have a working back-end to show me at the end of the month. If you don't honor that, I will have to take my business elsewhere and seek compensation from you for your lack of professionalism." Okay, I now have 12 days to completely create a back-end for the site. So I get a friend to help me and we work tirelessly through a weekend and I have a good base to work from in 9 days. Mind you, at this point he has only paid the security on the contract, about 5% of the total price, and has shielded himself from paying by hiding behind, "Well, if you can't honor the contract, why should I? Finish this work and then I'll pay as per the contract." Remembering now all the warnings I had heard about this guy and seeing how things have not gone my way so far, I decide to add a special function into the code just to protect myself. Now it's the end of the month. We have a front-end design he is okay with. We have a back-end that has been finished to about 85% of what is required according to the contract, and I still have 1 month left to finish everything else. It is time for show and tell. Since I was working on this development, I was running it on my own dev server, and so I showed him this in a browser on his computer. I mentioned to him that since I only had 512 kilobits per second upstream from the server, it might lag a little, but it wouldn't when it was installed on the professional server he has his website on at his hosting company. He says that's okay, and the demonstration goes ahead. As I'm showing him the site, both the front end and the back end, I can see he's immensely happy with it. Although he would never say so out loud, he is trying to hide his smile, which keeps popping up, and his eyes gleam with all the added ways he can now start making money from it. Anyway, despite how obviously happy he is with it, he now says that it's way too slow, this is wrong, that is wrong, blah blah blah. I want you to put it on my production server, and so that we can test how the speed is. Okay, that's no problem. I can make that happen, but before that, please pay me 50% of the contracted price, then I'll get right on it. He agrees to send me the money. I wait a few days and then I get an email from him where he includes a forwarded message from the bank detailing a transaction from him to me in the amount of 50% of the cost of the project. As soon as I get that, I push the system to his production server so he can take a look at it under beta.hisdomain.tld. I then send him an email stating that he can try the system with the supplied credentials. What he doesn't know is that I knew he had been fishing around for another programmer to do this project to pick up from a lazy deadbeat who couldn't do anything right, so I had a strong suspicion that he would most likely try to screw me. What I also suspected was that the email he sent me with the transaction proof was a fake, which it ended up being. Pro revenge number 1. Remember that small function I mentioned? Well, what it did was if user X, his user, tries to remove user Y, my admin, from the system without one setting being changed in the config first, the system will first delete and then purge the entire database and then remove all the documents in the web root. Well, not 5 minutes after he reads the email from me, he does just that. He tries to delete my admin user from the system to lock me out. Guess who has nothing of the project left? He does. Pro revenge number 2. Since it is considered forgery to spoof an email, especially from a bank, I sent the information to the authorities. This caused him to be investigated by both the police and the bank's lawyers. Pro revenge number 3. The system that I built was really quite good work. I didn't want to see it go to waste, so I sold the system to a competitor of his for more money than I made in the original contract to him. The last thing I heard was that this jerk was now blacklisted from owning a company in our country. He also lost his right to work as a lawyer. I only ever got that 5% of the contract that he paid at the very beginning. Having worked for over 5 months on this project, that is hardly anything. But the satisfaction of his downfall will keep my heart warm for the rest of my life. When an electronics repair store manager is wrongly blamed for stealing and named a thief, he decides to take matters into his own hands. Maybe your shop needs some competition. This little story of revenge is about how I got even with a former boss and how I destroyed his and his business partner's life in the process. Many years ago, I worked at an electronics repair store that will not be named. It was the only one in our smallish town, so everyone came there. I worked my way up from lowly tech to store manager in roughly 6 months. A few months after I made store manager, one of the owners, who we will call Dennis, insisted on bringing his nephew in as a part-time employee. Don't get ahead of me, Redditors. I initially didn't have any issues with the kid. He had come to the store on multiple occasions and we would all sit around in the back and talk. So again, I had no issues with bringing him on part-time. For a good month or two, the kid who we will call Kevin busted his behind, did everything right. He could solder an HDMI port on a PS4 in minutes, one less thing for me to do. Profits for the store were skyrocketing and things seemed rather fine from where I was standing. I was due to make a fairly large bonus that year as long as the store kept turning the amount of money it was turning. I figured at this time we could make Kevin our assistant manager and I could go back to doing paperwork, inventory orders and such, and leave the running of things to him. Well, mistakes were definitely made. I had a bad habit of writing down my login pin because Dennis and his business partner Jay were idiots and wanted the pin to be 9347893247349 digits long. These pins were required to access everything from sales data to the cash register and more. Anyway, around the time that I was turning over the majority of stuff to Kevin to do, I also started taking classes at the local university. So again, me being the idiot that I would leave to go to class before coming back and finishing my shift. Dennis and Jay were fine with this as long as I left someone competent in charge. Fast forward to the end of the month when accounts receivable numbers were run, and wouldn't you know it, we were short by thousands that month. I discussed everything with Dennis and Jay and we assumed it was a computer glitch. There was no way after almost a year of working there that the numbers were off. I had never had this happen before. The next month, we were once again off. It was around this time that Dennis and Jay came to me and started accusing me of stealing from them. They pointed out all of the days that the numbers didn't match up and saw that I was always closing that night. When I tried to explain to them that I was in class on those days when the money came up missing and suggested that they look at Kevin, Dennis blew his top. He said, how dare I accuse his nephew of anything, that it was my PIN used to access the register, etc. Needless to say, I was fired. Luckily, they didn't call the cops because, in Jay's words, I had made them a boatload of money. Here's my plan. A couple of years had passed since I was working there. I graduated college with a degree in business and had moved on with my life, or so I thought. One night while I was out at the store, I heard from behind me, "Yo, thief!" As I turned around, I see Kevin and Dennis with a crap-eating grin on their faces. I shrug it off and walk away, continuing to hear their childish taunts. While in my car, I began to formulate a plan. I was going to crush these mother flippers no matter how long it took. It took me 2 months of planning, but finally, I figured that I would use my social engineering skills and my business savvy to completely crash their business. I broke the HDMI port on my PS4 on purpose and took it to have it fixed. Kevin and a girl that had started there a few weeks earlier were the only two working. "Hey, welcome to such and such. Oh, it's you, thief. What can I help you with?" First off, you can stop calling me that. You and I both know it's BS. "Sorry, dude. Dennis told me to call you that. I'm sorry how everything went down. What can I help you with?" "My HDMI port broke. Do you guys still repair them?" "Yeah, we still repair them. It's $115. "Damn, you guys went up in price. Good on you. So how's everything been since I left?" "You mean since you were fired for stealing?" "Yeah, whatever. We both know that's BS. I knew Kevin was trying to impress the girl, but didn't care at that minute. We'll come back to her. As I glanced around, I saw that they had added some new things to the store, including OtterBox cases and such. Whoa, that's new. How did you guys manage to get in with OtterBox? "Oh, we didn't. They kept turning us down, so I found a Chinese distro. We get them for $5 and sell them for $30. I'm thinking to myself, this dude loves to blab. I need to keep it up. How much have the prices gone up on other things?" "Oh, quite a bit actually. You thought you were running this store a profit? Let me show you something." He showed me their new price list, which was insane on the pricing and also a big mistake. Revenge is mine. I never believed in ripping anyone off, so I always convinced Dennis and Jay our pricing was fair, and that they didn't need to charge a lot for repairs. Since they were the only game in town, they had everyone by the balls. After the work was finished, I said goodbye and made sure to wave to the girl as I walked out. This is when my plan really went into motion. I had everything I needed to crush these mother flippers. all except a building. The next day, I looked around for a location to begin to dismantle their monopolistic hold on the town. As luck would have it, a location right across the street from their store was coming up for rent. I quickly signed the lease and began to distribute flyers, letting the town know about our coming grand opening. On the flyer, I was offering 90% off the first repair. Basically, I was doing the work for free, just all they had to do was pay the part price. Opening day comes and I have 60 people there to get repairs, ranging from iPhone screen repairs to simple PC tune-ups. This went on like this for months. Sure, I was taking a loss on the building rent, but this being a smallish town, the rent was easily manageable. After things started to settle down, the business became steady. Dennis and Jay started losing massive business due to the new guy in town. They still hadn't realized it was me. Jane walked in as I was closing up shop. Jane, if you recall, was the girl who worked for Dennis that Kevin was trying to hit on. Apparently, she had been let go that night and was looking for another job. I immediately gave her the job because she knew her stuff. I asked her what all happened over there, and she said everything has gone to crap and that the store has been losing tens of thousands since this place opened and that she would have left sooner if she didn't need the job. Kevin apparently really liked her and couldn't keep his hands to himself. A month after Jane came in, Dennis and Jay came in to see who their new competition was. As they walked in, I greeted them as I do any customer. "Welcome to the new guy's electronic repair. How can I help you?" "Does the owner know he hired a thief?" "Oh, I'm sure he knows you're full of crap on that one." "Get me your manager, you piece of crap thief." "Sir, I am the manager. How can I help you?" "Well, is the owner here?" "Yes, sir, he is." "Good, then go get him so that I can tell him what a thief you are." "Sure, 1 minute." I walk into the back and start talking to Jane. We both enjoy a laugh because she overheard this dude. I walk out of the back and look at Dennis. "How can I help you?" "You can stop playing games and get me your owner." I point to the sign behind me. "Yeah, that's me. How can I help you?" "You're the one that has been taking all of our business?" "Yep. You called me a thief when you knew all along it was your piece of crap nephew that was stealing from you. I made it my life's mission to destroy you the day you and Kevin called me a thief in the store. You couldn't leave well enough alone." "You mean to tell me that this is all his fault?" Looking at Dennis. "Yep, and yours as well. You had a chance to stick up for me and didn't. If I can't assist you, gentlemen, with a repair or anything, I kindly ask that you leave my store." "Flip you, you haven't heard the end of us." This quite literally cracked me up, the dude trying to talk tough. I laughed as they stormed out of my store. About this time, Jane came from out of the back area and dropped her phone. I bent down to pick it up and noticed that it was the fake OtterBoxes that the other store was selling. I made an anonymous tip to OtterBox regarding them selling counterfeits. Boy, let me tell you, OtterBox doesn't flipping play. Within a week, the other store was raided. Kevin, Dennis, and Jay were all arrested for selling counterfeit items and were sued into bankruptcy. As for Jane and I, well, we just welcomed our first child into the world and have been married for a year and a half. If you're reading this, Kevin, little flipping thief, not only did I cost you and your uncle everything, but I also took your woman. My narcissist boss and complicit company get what they deserve. A bit of background. A few years ago, I quit my career in the tech industry. This was after the company I was working for went public and everything went downhill. I was sick of making money for the rich and needed some time to really live life. I proceeded to spend a few months traveling, working on home projects, and really doing whatever the hell I wanted. One day, about 4 months into my freedom, I was having lunch with my best friend, and she told me, "You need to stop being lazy and get a job." She had recently been hired at a company in the construction industry and mentioned there was an opening. The opening was doing something I had zero experience in, but a change of career was appealing. I applied and promptly was given a phone interview. I spent a little time researching everything about this position, and after many interviews, managed to fake my way in. Turns out, this position was wildly different from anything I had done before. It taxed me in ways I had never experienced. Not only was my job stressful, my boss turned into a nightmare. He had worked there since the company was founded. He was part of the good old boys club. Now, for everyone that doesn't know, the construction industry has virtually zero HR. This was close to $1 billion company and was still the same way. My boss was a narcissist, sexist, liar, and downright jerk. Weirdly, most of that was directed towards others and not me. My best friend was one person that took the brunt of it. It killed me to hear what he would say to her. All of this took its toll on me. New Year's Day. About 3 months into my employment, January 1st hit. I wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning with pain in my chest and my head racing a million miles an hour. Luckily, my roommate was a paramedic and happened to be home. I rush over to her room and yell that I think I'm having a heart attack. She comes out, takes my vitals, asks some questions, and determines I am most likely having a panic attack. Sure enough, I calmed down and managed to not die. I had never had a panic attack up until then. Throughout the following week, I continued to have flare-ups of chest pain and heart palpitations. I figure something could really be wrong, so I go to my doctor. He does a few tests and determines it's most likely some acid reflux. He prescribes some meds and the following week is better. Then one night, when heading home from dinner with my sister, boom! I get rear-ended at a stoplight by a drunk driver. No skid marks, didn't even attempt to stop. I felt a bit of tightness in my back, so decide to go get checked out at the hospital to be safe. I get there and they take my vitals. My blood pressure was on the moon, like 180 over 100. They take it about an hour later and it's still high. They recommend I go see my doctor again. The next couple weeks waiting for my doctor appointment is hell. I am having daily panic attacks, chest pain, trouble breathing, massive fatigue, the whole gambit. I finally get to the day of my appointment, let my doctor know what's going on, and he determines I should go see a few different specialists and get all kinds of tests done just to be safe. Throughout the next couple months, I have everything poked and prodded. Because of the amount of tests that needed to be done, I missed a good bit of work. This turned my boss on me. He constantly complained about me being gone, all the while not an ounce of work was dropped. With my tech background, I also took it upon myself to start making reports and collecting data that I would present to him on ways of improving the department and company. I later found out he would take these reports, which at times could save the company hundreds of thousands to potentially millions of dollars, and present them as his own to the owner. This made me furious and didn't help with my physical issues. However, slowly I made it through all of the prescribed tests and they couldn't find anything physically wrong with me. Turns out all of the issues were caused by stress and anxiety, something I had never had an issue with before. My doctor referred me to an amazing counselor that helped me learn how to manage the problems I was facing and get back to a reasonable state of mind, although this never got to an acceptable level because of my boss. I started to email HR about my issues with him and about the things I had witnessed with others and him. Most of this was met with unwillingness to help in any way. Cue the turning point. A dear coworker whom everyone loved and respected decided to quit out of nowhere. She too worked under my boss. In her exit interview, she gave the sole reason for quitting as my boss. She finally hit her breaking point and enough was enough. However, because she was so well liked, this prompted some questions from the owner and other senior management. They wanted to know why my boss was the reason for her leaving. They had HR set up a meeting with us in the department and our boss to go over our issues with him. We all were excited to finally, hopefully, get the people that matter to listen. We have the meeting and we all lay out the issues with our boss and give a multitude of examples. I went a bit overboard and had an entire presentation. Unfortunately, it turns out this was all a charade to cover my boss's ass. He was prescribed some management counseling, which I'm pretty sure he never did, and things continued on their merry way. However, now, with the knowledge my boss had of our issues with him, he turned the volume up to 11. The constant berating, yelling, write-ups came flowing out. It got bad enough that I started to secretly record every meeting with him. I saved every single email and documented every interaction with him. I continued to push for help from HR, but again, his status in the company kept him immune from any response. Thankfully, throughout all of this, I managed to keep my mental health in check thanks to the tools that my counselor taught me. I once again get sick. Yes, I get sick, but this time it's with a real cold and lasts only a few days, all of which covered by government-mandated sick time. I come back to work and not even a week goes by and I get called into my boss's office with the other senior management. I knew this wasn't good. My boss lets me know that they are firing me for attendance. I am gobsmacked. I have never been fired in my life, and I know I was an asset to the company's success. I didn't slack off, I didn't miss deadlines. The attendance excuse appeared to just be what my boss thought would be easiest to get rid of me with. Now, I live in an at-will state. You can be fired for basically any reason except for a bad one. They presented me with a meager 2 weeks pay severance. I declined signing it, packed my stuff up, and left. I knew the whole situation didn't feel right, especially because I was familiar with the recent state laws that passed about sick time and an employer not being legally allowed to fire you for using it. Because of this, I went to my mom, who has been in the law field her entire life, and got a referral for an employment law attorney. Things started to look up. The day of my appointment with the employment law attorney couldn't come quick enough. I had gathered everything I collected from my time at the company and presented it to him. The recordings on my phone, the emails, the documented interactions, everything. After showing the attorney, he pushes back from his desk and says, "Holy crap, you have a hell of a case here. They messed up bad." A wave of relief flows over my entire body. Me thinking the only blatant violation was firing me for using sick time, I was taken aback when he proceeded to explain that the company made 4 huge violations, the sick time violation not even being anywhere near the top of the list. Some big things I learned from him. The meeting I had with my boss, HR, and the rest of the department where we went over all of our issues with him was a key piece of evidence for one of their biggest violations. I learned this type of meeting is considered protected concerted activity and covered under the National Labor Relations Act. The act protects against retaliation for having this kind of meeting. According to my lawyer, all of my boss's activities following that meeting can be considered retaliation. When it comes to health issues and how they affect you at your workplace, make sure you document every interaction with your employer. It's important to show that you made an effort to let them know of your complications and how they may affect you at your workplace. I sent countless emails to HR letting them know of my mental health issues, and their failure to make accommodations was a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Having recordings and documentation on how your employer interacts differently with females and males is important to prove a violation of the Civil Rights Act. After all of this, the lawyer stated I had 3 options. Option 1, I could retain him and we could file a lawsuit. He explained that would be expensive and take a lot of time. However, it would most likely result in a good amount of money. Option 2, I could file claims with all of the departments that cover the violated acts. He explained that some of these departments can take years to investigate and process the claims. However, for some of them, especially the violations of the National Labor and Relations Act, the investigation can be absolute hell on the employer. This would probably be the biggest FU to the employer. Option 3, I go back by myself and renegotiate the severance, this being the quickest and easiest option. This option sounded very appealing. I really didn't want to drag this out for multiple years. I told the lawyer that option 3 is most likely my choice, and he mentioned that I should probably start negotiations at 9 months of severance and full benefits. After consulting with people close to me, I decided to go with option 3. I met with HR and senior management, explained that I consulted with an employment law attorney, stated all of the acts that he feels they violated, and asked for 9 months of severance. After a couple weeks negotiating with their attorney, we settled on 6 months of severance with full benefits. It's been a few years since this has happened, and it still makes me feel overwhelmingly happy thinking about it. In the end, I found an absolutely amazing job in the same industry. My ex-boss ended up being moved to a position that wasn't in management. And hopefully, nobody will ever have to go through what I and others went through at that company again. Debt collection from the grave, a story of money. Let's jump right in. My grandma told me this story recently about how her brother got his butt kicked from the grave. So this is the scenario. My grandma comes from a family of 5, 4 girls, 1 boy. My great-grandfather Hank was ecstatic with the boy. We will call him Jack. One more important thing is that my great-grandfather ran a very successful company that made high-end clothing and bathroom silks, towels, bathrobes. He made a fortune with his company and made sure everyone who worked for the company got his fair share. He also looked after the family. All his children got an education. All his children got the chance to get their driver's license. It was back in the 1960s, so it was a big deal back then. They were the first in my home time with a car, radio, and TV. My great-grandfather treated everyone equally, but that changed when his first and only son was born. He already had 4 girls and now finally a son. The roadmap was laid out for his son. He would become the heir to his company. So began the upbringing of Jack. He was, let's say, a kid with a mouth. This wasn't bad per se. The thing was that his father allowed it. Jack got kicked from his first school. Jack got caught for shoplifting. Jack got kicked from his second school. Jack got caught joyriding, and so on and so on. Hank did not sit Jack down and tell him the severity of his actions. He would just shrug and tell his wife, my great-grandmother, Anna, that they were just childhood quirks. Anna tried to make something out of Jack, but he was a lost cause. Jack became 18 and Hank decided that it was time to introduce him into the company. The company did better than ever, and the whole family was involved. Jack began at the bottom of the ladder and had to work his way up. This is where Jack began to shine. By shine, my grandmother meant that her brother was not a bright light at school, but he was a hard worker and had a nose for business, if not so much for people. Jack was being an ass as per usual and got married to his first wife. She was a Karen. She wanted to start her own company and her father-in-law Hank wanted to retire. She pushed Jack to take over quickly and pushed the rest of the family out. Jack listened to her and told his father that he was ready and that his sisters and their husbands would tear the company apart if they stayed in their leadership roles. The thing was that only 1 daughter and son-in-law were involved in the company at this point, 1980. My grandmother oversaw the seamstresses and the quality department, and my grandfather oversaw the financial and the suppliers. Karen wanted full control and started a little fire in the family. She spread a rumor that grandfather stole from the company. I do not know what transpired, but in the end my great-grandfather bought out all the family and Jack bought out great-grandfather. The company was Jack and Karen's company now, and things went tits up pretty quickly. Seamstresses quit, bills were not paid, and Jack had to take a loan from great-grandfather. The family company was barely scraping by when Karen left Jack because he could not provide for her. It became apparent that Jack could not make it work and was looking for a way out. After a while, great-grandfather had seen enough and bought back the remnants of his company and sold it to a bigger company that wanted to expand. This made the wealth he amassed even bigger. He set up different bank accounts for his children and said that if someone was in need, they could take money from that account. He told Jack his cut was smaller since he was the reason the company was sold, and that he felt let down by his son's carelessness running his company into the ground. Jack was angry and told his father that he would have made it work if he had more time. It remained a sour point between the two of them. Things went well for a while, but Jack married a second time with a woman named Helen. Helen, like Karen, wanted her own business. Jack agreed and took money from the account in order to start Helen's company. The business was a little barbershop and ran pretty well. They were spending their money on living luxuriously and did not save any money. After a while, my grandmother got a call from her little brother Jack asking if he could store some goods in her garage. My grandfather did not trust Jack and told him no. While my grandmother did not agree, she accepted my grandfather's decision. A few weeks later, Jack got caught for possession of stolen goods and drug smuggling. It was not a surprise, but nonetheless a letdown for my great-grandfather Hank. This time he would not help Jack and told him that he would no longer stand behind him. After a few years, Jack got out and was again a divorced man. He married again and divorced another 3 times, and each time he gave these women a business and a lavish lifestyle. New cars, big houses, expensive vacations. He drained his money and robbed his emergency bank account dry. He borrowed a lot of money from great-grandfather and so on. In 2013, great-grandfather fell ill. It was clear that he was not going to make it, and he took his final days in stride. At this time, Jack became very buddy-buddy and started to help great-grandfather sell some stuff. At some point, my grandmother sat down with her father and asked him where the money went for all the sold stuff, and great-grandfather told her not to worry about it. He took care of it in his will. After his 95th birthday, my great-grandfather passed away, quietly and peacefully. After the funeral, the family all went to the reading of his will, all except for Jack. He had given a power of attorney to my grandmother to sign the will in his place. The will gave all the children their fair share. At the end, the notary public had them sign the papers and the inheritance was theirs. At some point, my grandma called my dad. She had inherited some collateral papers, notes of debt from someone who owed my great-grandfather money. My father told her to call a lawyer's office to get the money from these papers. A few days after calling the lawyer's office, my grandmother gets a call from her brother. Why was she taking his money from the inheritance? My grandmother told him she had inherited some debt notes and that she wanted to get the money owed repaid. Jack was furious and told her that was illegal. Jack was wrong. It wasn't illegal. Great-grandfather had documented every penny his son had borrowed from him and constructed his will in such a way that the rest of his children would get that part of their money spent by their money drain of a brother. Also, great-grandfather had found out that Jack stole from him. You see, Jack was putting the money he made from the stuff sold into his own banking account instead of giving it to his father. Since this ordeal, Jack has not contacted my grandmother or his sisters. He has since paid everything back and in the end never saw a penny of his inheritance. Great-grandfather wrote in a letter why he did this. He was done with his son because of all the lying, the careless management of his company, all the money had blown, and years of never taking any responsibility. He gave his final lesson to his son from the grave. Revenge of the highway construction boss. First things first, this is a story that an old friend, co-worker of mine told me years ago. This friend has since passed away, rest in peace Greg, so I am unable to go back to him to get more details. Greg's family lived near Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Greg's dad was in construction, working as a job site foreman, and Calgary was going through an oil boom in the 1980s and new roads and highways needed to be built. The practice at the time, probably still is, was to get expensive surveyors to lay out the path for the road at the start of the project, and the path was marked with wooden stakes in the ground. These roads were going through some of the grasslands on Calgary's outskirts, and good progress was being made on the road in question. Then, one morning, the crew got to the job site and found that all of the stakes had been knocked over. Calgary had, maybe still has, its fair share of yahoos and pickup trucks who like to cause trouble, so from the tire tracks they figure that during the night someone had found the job site, noticed the stakes, and decided it would be fun to drive over all of them. I suppose today's yahoos and pickups would be deterred by cheaper surveillance cameras, but this was 30 or 35 years ago. Greg's dad was fuming, but he had to call the surveyors back in to do the layout again before they could continue. A few nights later, the same thing happened again. They arrived at the site and found all of the stakes knocked out again. Another call to the surveyor's office later, they had the road mapped again, but Greg's dad had a plan. Construction sites can have a lot of rebar and other types of iron and other metals lying around. They also have lots of heavy equipment for applying force to things. After the stakes were mapped out for the third time, Greg's dad got a crew together to drive an 8-foot-long piece of iron vertically into the ground directly behind one of the stakes near the end of the road layout, with the top of the iron in line with the top of the stake. Then he waited. A small number of days later, he got to the job site and found a wrecked pickup truck in the field along the road's path. Its oil pan and other undercarriage components had been ripped off by the metal post that was protruding from the ground. They had signs all around the site indicating that unauthorized vehicles were prohibited, entering was at your own risk, etc. So they were covered from a legal standpoint. With the truck as evidence, they were able to find its owner and have him charged with trespassing, destruction of property, mischief, and anything else they could make stick. How I got my old boss back after 6 years of super illegal labor law practices. This story is super long. This is 6 years worth of illegal practices and abuse. It's super cathartic for me to write this, and I'm going to spare no expense on the dirt. I've now been out of the company long enough that I feel safe and secure enough to post about how I left my 6-year-long career at a famous chain sub shop. I've always posted stories about entitled customers and parents from there, but this one will be about my super entitled butthole of a boss and how I got my sweet revenge when I finally left the company. How it started. When I was 25, I was in a pretty weird situation where I needed a job and I could not afford to be picky about which one I got. I just happened to be in a local sub shop asking the manager if they were hiring, and the owner was there that day. He hired me on the spot and I started working the next day. Training went quick and I was working 40 hours a week and finally earning some money. My first red flag that something here was not exactly normal was the fact that the manager quit less than a month after I had been hired. She had asked for weekends off to be with her children and the owner told her no. She actually made a fully functional schedule that worked for everyone that gave her Saturdays off. He put her back to Wednesdays off, so she just walked out. I was promoted to manager with less than a month of training under me. But I was determined to stay with the job and I was going to enjoy the dollar raise that came with it. So I taught myself how to do inventory and food orders. I taught myself how to make schedules and do all the other things that a sub shop manager does. I actually got pretty good at it. After a year of doing it, I had expedited the inventory process and made it so functional the owner had me teach other managers that he hired at his other franchise locations. He owned 6 shops total. They were scattered all over the place, and 2 of them, one I worked at, were less than a mile from each other. The owner decided he wanted to have a monopoly in the city and bought the last sub shop in the area. He made me area manager and put me at the new location. Basically, my daily job was this: show up at 11 a.m. to relieve the store opener, make sure that everything was functioning, work until 7 p.m. when I would be relieved by the closer. Then I would drive to the other 2 locations to check and make sure everything was okay. Some days I will drive to location A in the morning before my shift started, and I would drive to location B after I began my shift. On Tuesdays, I did inventories, and on Wednesdays, I did 3 stores worth of delivery orders. The store I was working at was slow enough that it technically only needed one person working at a time, with a little overlap during the lunch and dinner rush. It kinda sucked sometimes. If it got busy, you were doing it all on your own. You had to help customers during your lunch break, and you didn't technically get breaks. Going to the bathroom was a gamble. I still dread hearing that doorbell go off when I was midstream. At first, it was a perfectly reasonable job. I had the stores operating effectively. Everything was organized, inventory counts were very accurate, and there was very little shrinkage. Customers were happy. That lasted about 6 months before things started getting illegal. I think my boss was having some kind of personal or marriage problems and was taking it out on his staff. Both he and his wife came from super rich families, millionaires. I have been to their mansion one time for a birthday party. Indoor and outdoor pool, private movie theater complete with bar and popcorn maker. They had cash to burn. The first illegal thing that happened was when our store got broken into. A thief broke the window with a rock and tried to find the cash box. As it was locked in the safe, he didn't get anything, but he did pry open the till drawer to find it empty. The police called me since my number was on the whiteboard marked as emergency contact. I showed up and took inventory and told the police the thief had stolen nothing. I even gave them video footage of the thief. A few days later, a cop came back and asked me to confirm how much had been stolen from the store. I told him 0. It turns out my boss had reported a loss of $500 from the cash box. I'm not sure if he got fined for filing a false police report, but he showed up at work the next day and yelled at me. He told me, "You don't tell the cops anything unless I give you permission next time." Over the next couple of months, he also started becoming a penny pincher at all of his locations. He would jack up the price of the subs to the maximum amount he was allowed to by the franchise. He would skimp on the veggies and would yell at us if we put on the recommended amount. If the recipe called for 8 slices of turkey, he told us to put on 6. Basically pissing off all of my regulars. It killed our business, which meant we were earning less, which made him more of a penny pincher. Things started breaking in the store and he wouldn't hire professionals to fix it. He would bring in friends and pay them in beer. I remember his mechanic friend coming in to fix our freezer over 10 times in a year. It never properly kept the food at freezing temperatures and leaked water into the freezer. When health inspectors would come in, they would point it out and my boss would say, "Yeah, I'm getting it fixed next week." I was so nervous getting frozen food out of the freezer that was basically 33 degrees all the time. Our frozen bread was floppy half the time. I dealt with this for multiple years. I know, I'm an idiot. I should have run away long ago, but I was literally living hand to mouth, and me and my husband were trying to keep a roof over our head. We were both working 60+ hours a week. We just didn't have our lives together enough to be picky. If I was going to leave that store, I would need to find a job that paid 1.5 times the minimum wage as a starter pay to make the same amount I was doing 60 hours a week as the area manager. It was when my boss started doing illegal labor law practices that I began seriously looking to leave. I handled faxing in the payroll at the end of every week. There's always a little star next to your clock in and out when the time has been altered. I'll fix it if somebody forgets to clock in or forgets to clock out, etc. I started noticing that everybody's hours have been adjusted multiple times on multiple days. The boss was cutting people's hours back by half an hour plus. If they clocked in at 6, he would change it to 6:30. I pointed this out to him. He used the excuse that they just stand around and waste time every shift, so I take that time away. He installed video cameras. He would literally watch them from home with a stopwatch and send me a text at the end of the day telling me to retract certain amounts of time off of everybody's shift. I told him no. If he wanted this done, he could do it himself. It was crazy illegal, and I wanted no part of it. I also discovered something one year when he was showing me how to do the year-end reports for tax filing. Even though the stores were a franchise and were all owned and operated by him and his wife, each individual store he had registered under a different business name and a different bank. For example, if you worked at Store A, you got a paycheck from Waldo & Sons LLC, and if you covered somebody's shift at Store B the same week, you got a second paycheck from Waldo Incorporated, etc. I asked him why he did this, as it seemed incredibly unnecessary and complicated. He told me it was for tax purposes. He paid less taxes if he registered each store as its own individual franchise. He also had them registered under different people's names. I pointed out that this was illegal. He said he could get away with it by claiming that each store was owned by somebody else in his family. For example, one store was owned by his wife, one store was in his name, this store was in his brother's name, etc. It was super shady. He had us do a ton of other super disgusting things too. I'd seen him rinse food off that had fallen on the floor. When we got in lettuce that was turning brown, and he'd have us pick out the bad leaves but keep the green stuff. He'd drive food from one store to the other in an unrefrigerated car and take hours to get from point A to point B. Sometimes the meat was warm by the time it arrived. I had already been here 6 years dealing with this crap. I was fixing to leave very soon. I had enough saved up to cover bills for at least 3 months to give me time to find a new job. I kept telling him that if he pushed me too far, I would leave him high and dry with no area manager, and he would have to come all the way out to man the stores himself. He showed up to the stores maybe once a week. He mostly went to the stores closest to his house. He hated having to drive the hour-long drive from where he lived to my 3 stores, way out in the boondocks. The day finally came where he pushed me to my breaking point. Inspectors of the franchise came monthly. They were technically required to find 3 things wrong at every location because nobody could be perfect. There were minor, moderate, and major errors that they could find. Major errors got the owner fined. I had only had 1 major error found between my 3 stores in the 6 years there. But one day the boss called yelling at me because of a burnt out light bulb in the oven. It was a minor error, but he laid into me like I had just gotten the store shut down. It was so bad, my mother and father heard him yelling at me over the phone speaker. My parents had been pushing me to quit this job for a while. My dad got so pissed listening to my boss yelling, he promised to cover my rent until I could get a new job if I just hung up on him. I just sat silently and let him yell. When it was over, I said, "Okay, I'll do better tomorrow," then hung up. That night, I stayed up super late finding all the phone numbers for Labor and Industries, OSHA, and all the legal resources I could. The next day, I didn't go into work. I stayed home making phone calls. I still had texts from the boss telling me to adjust people's hours. I had recordings from our security cameras of him changing the dates on the prepped food so we didn't throw it away as soon. I even had 5 years plus worth of pay stubs from 3 different business names owned by 3 different people, but all signed by him. Labor and Industries was incredibly interested to hear about the time clock adjustments. They happily accepted emailed copies of all my text logs and several dozen pages of faxed pay stubs. I also learned that he should have been paying me overtime for working 20 hours extra each week. He told me I was salary, yet he classified my pay as hourly. I ended up speaking to a couple of different people about his fraudulent tax and money practices. Every single one of them wanted copies of my pay stubs and proof that they were owned by the same person. The best call I saved for last, a call to the local health inspector. I informed them about the leaky freezer, the changing of dates on prepped food, the disgusting practice of keeping food far past its expiry date, the temp logbook that we literally just wrote down random numbers instead of actually taking the temperatures because it takes too long to do that every 2 hours. Or my personal favorite, the time a plumber was fixing the toilet and it literally exploded poopy water out into our lobby. The boss made us keep the store open and mop it up quickly, right in front of customers. The health inspector was very interested. All of these calls I did while getting dozens of angry voicemails and texts from my boss asking me where the hell I was. Since I was literally supposed to be working a shift and didn't show up, the poor opener had to stay late and the closer had to come in early. I felt a little bad about that, but I knew the next day the boss himself would have to come in to cover the shift unless he hired somebody and trained them overnight. I ignored every single one of his phone calls. I just never went back, not even for my last paycheck. I never heard back about getting all that unpaid overtime, but I did hear through the grapevine about the fallout of what happened the next few months. 2 of my boss's stores were completely shut down, as in health inspectors putting a red warning label on the doors and gave him 1 month to fix all of the problems before they would let him open again. He lost his franchise rights with the company. He had to sell all of his stores to other franchisees. Since he was still paying back loans on a couple of them, he had to sell them at a loss. Almost every single one of his employees working for him at the time got huge payouts for the missing time that he had removed from their time clock. One former employee I met up with almost a year later told me that he received a check for $5,000. He had only been there a year. I also learned that my boss got put on 2 years of probation in lieu of prison time. And apparently he failed his first surprise drug test, so he ended up spending a couple of weeks behind bars anyway. It felt so good to flip him the bird and let him sleep in the bed that he had made. I've got another job now, and I get paid the same amount that I was earning from him, but I only work 40 hours a week. I actually get lunch breaks now. I get overtime now. I didn't realize how illegal his practices had been until I started working a normal 9-to-5 job. To this day, the idea of taking a lunch break without having to help customers in the middle of it is just wonderful. And now you all know why I will probably never eat at another chain or franchise sub shop again. This is John from Slash Bash. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video and want to be the first to know when the next one drops, then subscribe and click on that notifications bell. We would love for you to drop a like, share it with your friends, and we will see you in the next one.